Hey, you're listening to the Big Breakdown podcast with Kris, Stafford, and Harrison Marshall. Take it away, fellas.
Hello and welcome along to season 3 of the Big Breakdown podcast, where in this season we're looking at coaching skills, and today we have a very special guest looking at each of the individual skills that we've covered so far in the season. Harrison, we've got a great guest on today, and I'm very much looking forward to the conversation.
Same here, Kris. Same here. It's a hell of a guest we've got on. That's just got a wealth of knowledge for all the environments that he's worked in. So look, I'm very excited. I hope that you are, Kris. You know, you've hopefully you can get back into work mode after having a week away in the sun, and you can definitely tell if you're watching this live on YouTube. If you're watching this on YouTube right now,
Yeah, I'm not the colour of the moon. It was good to get away. Good to have some time off. Come back really refreshed, reflect and start planning for next year. So it's good to have a break. And looking forward to the chat today. So today we are joined by Ben Ryan. Ben is one of the most successful rugby coaches in the history of the game, having worked at the top end of international sport for over a decade. Ben started his coaching journey as a teacher at St Edward's School in Oxford, which by the time he left after 6 years had played every England international squad from under 16s to seniors. Ben started coaching England Sevens in 2007, where he was in charge for 56 World Series Sevens tournaments, over 300 games, the longest serving England Sevens head coach, and reached the semi-finals or better 28 times. In September 2013, Ryan was signed as the coach for the Fiji Sevens team. He led them to victory in the Dubai Sevens for the first time in the nation's history in only his second tournament in charge. As coach of Fiji, Ryan won 9 World Seven Series tournaments, and in 2015 were crowned overall winners, giving Ryan his first ever Seven Series world title. At the 2016 Olympics, Ben coached Fiji to the gold medal in the Rugby Sevens competition, where the team earned Fiji's first ever Olympic medal in their history. Ben joins us today to chat about coaching skills. Ben, how are you?
Good, thanks, actually. It's Monday morning here in southwest London. Grey skies, had a nice relaxing weekend. Saw the Mighty Bees beat Everton on Sunday afternoon, which was delightful. So yeah, it's been a good start to the week.
Yeah, well, I was in Crete this time last week. It's been a bit of a shock to the system coming back to a little bit of rain, but never mind. We should be used to it. We really appreciate you coming on and chatting about some sort of coaching skills. So over the course of this season so far, we've looked at session objectives, activity structure, learner engagement, coaching behaviours, communication in coaching, and touched on a bit of reflection. We've sort of highlighted these as the 3 sort of fat pillars of sort of coaching skills. I suppose sort of from your experience, how important are these skills to sort of be aware as a coach, not only collectively but individually as well?
Yeah, it's a good question. Look, for me, I like to keep everything as simple as possible, which isn't always easy. But I build everything around guiding principles. So, you know, what the objectives that you want to get, both in the short, medium, and long term. And how are you going to go about doing that? And how do you check that you're on the right path? So, you know, I might not be using the same terminology as you guys said. That's kind of how I look at forming any coaching sessions when I'm mentoring coaches or speaking to athletes. It's always around guiding principles and then checking on those principles.
Yeah, and I think there'll be a lot of ways that people phrase different things sort of for sort of how we've done it. I mean, you started your sort of journey, I suppose, in teaching, didn't you? So how much did that sort of prepare you in terms of getting into coaching?
Yeah, teaching was like invaluable for me, really. And as much as the desire and why I wanted to go into teaching, as much as what I learned when I was a teacher. So, you know, I want to like maximize the impact of the people that I work with alongside and you know, help them be their best version. And that sometimes gets lost as you move up the pyramid into professional sport. You know, you look at various other objectives and the data starts to come rushing in at all sides, and you forget about, you know, the reasons why you do what you do. And so teaching always drove you back to that core principle on helping people become better at what they're doing, and whether that's in, you know, in a year 8 basketball class or an A-level art class or sports science class. It's all around still helping people become better, and those soft skills that you learn as a teacher are so important. The different learning styles, different ways to engage, understanding body language. I probably got more out of that when I was in Fiji, but certainly teaching, you know, I mean, so I did my PGCE and did my teacher training up in Kings Lynn in Norfolk, which I learned quite a lot from, although my second placement, I remember getting taken into the store cupboard and got handed like a small rubber discus. And the head of the department was like, and you get any problems with any of the kids, you know, just coming in here to have a look around, and, you know, you can always give them a whack with this discus. And I was like, do I write this down in my learnings this week when I go and see my tutor? It's probably not very, it's not something that I'm going to plan on doing. And so I learned quite a lot in Kings Lynn, and then I had some time playing professional rugby, got an injury, and then ended up like jobless really. So I went on supply, where, you know, you wait for the phone to ring at about 6:30, and I was doing supply anywhere in central London really, and did quite a lot of it in Brent Cross, by Wembley, and then I ended up for a couple of terms in Southall, which was a school called Cardinal Wiseman. I think it's the 3rd biggest comprehensive in London, 2,500 kids, no grass pitches or anything like that. And I loved it because, you know, kids are kids. And once you understand how that they understand that you're there to help them and you're consistent in your behaviors, I really enjoyed that. And I was actually difficult for me to leave. And then when I went there, I went back to playing rugby, got another injury. And then the club Newbury that was paying my wages said, well, we've got to try and make some use out of you whilst you're injured. So they lent me out to a private school to start coaching rugby, St Edward's, Oxford. And then just whilst I was there, I was enjoying my teaching. The school were enjoying me working there. And then they said, well, why don't you come over to us and start and create the PE department? Because there wasn't one. They just did some kind of informal PE in year 7. So I went there and I set up a PE department, and now it's flourishing. It's got double-digit numbers. They do A-level and IB and GCSE, and, you know, it's and it does well in extracurricular. So yeah, my teaching was really, really important for everything that I've done.
You talk around, I think Kris and I will probably agree that we want to create the best versions of the athletes or the students or players that we're working with. And I think, you know, I work with 16 to 18-year-olds, and I've kind of got that same philosophy. You know, there's a lot of growing up between 16 and 18, and, you know, there's a big impact on their lives as rugby coaches. But so how do you do that in the kind of the elite levels that you've worked in? How do you kind of check in with yourself to make sure that you are still focused on making them the best version of themselves rather than the external factors of what ultimately winning?
Yeah, that's a good question. And so I'll try and provide some examples. If you're working with elite athletes that, I don't know, professional footballer, for example, that, you know, might be on a lot of money and also under lots of pressures, then if I'm working with him and I'm trying to help him become better, we've already had that. My methodology would be to make sure that, you know, I've built up a relationship so he trusts me, because that's important. I can't suddenly go in and start asking him questions that I just wouldn't feel comfortable on asking. So you've got to have that trust, and that's building that first. And then once you understand what the requirements are, how that athlete needs some help, where there's performance gaps or, you know, maybe lifestyle gaps. And it might be as simple as just looking at where their energy is at the moment, as far as, you know, their loads, their physical, their life, and their cognitive loads. I'll work out where we can help, and then I'll either help myself or I'll bring in people around that athlete to help them. And then we'll just constantly be checking. And that's by asking athlete, right? Rather than looking on your laptop and seeing what the data is telling us. It's asking the athlete. And if you've built trust up, then you're getting decent feedback, and, you know, you can genuinely believe that what you're hearing is right. If you haven't built the trust, or the data is corrupted in some way, as far as like the questions you're asking. So again, something that's really common is wellness questionnaires, like filling in a wellness questionnaire, like, how are you feeling today? Now, most athletes, if that's not been framed properly, will think, I've got to say I am brilliant today because I want to get picked on Saturday or Sunday or whenever it is. And they will infer that if I go, do you know what, actually, I don't feel great today. I know I was paired with another bloke that's snoring, or I've just had an argument with my missus, or I've got a bit of a headache, or my hamstring's hurting. I'm not going to write that down because the coaches might think, let's give him a miss at the weekend, or let's sub him off early. And so they're giving him a 9 or 10, and then you're getting corrupted data, which means that you're not going to improve. And all of that is based on clarity at the start and trust, so that players can say to their coaches, do you know what, I'm absolutely knackered today, and this has happened or that's happened, or I just need a breather because I'm having some problems at home, or whatever it is. So that's super important as part of all of this. And it goes into, the stuff that's harder to measure, but is actually more than equally important. It's vital to have those relationships.
So building that trust, that's been a common thing that's come out of quite a lot of the episodes. How best can we go about building trust sort of with our athletes in order to sort of create that optimal environment?
There's a few things that and they all run in parallel, really. So you've got to be open as a coach to not have cognitive biases. So not think, that this is what you want the answers to be coming back as. Not to jump in as far as you see a behavior and you think, you're going downstream all the time to that behavior. So players turning up late for training and you just think they've got a lack of respect, and that's where you're going downstream to, instead of, going upstream and being curious and going, okay, I wonder why this guy's late for training, because he's not showing behaviors in other aspects that he lacks professionalism or respect. So you need to be curious and open-minded and have that ability to breathe, so you can just investigate, really. So that curiosity, I haven't thought about it before, but the 3 C's really are important. The curiosity, clarity in what you're asking, and then that consistency is really important. And like your ABCs with every single person that you meet in life is vital. And that's like how you approach someone, your behavior that you have with someone, and your conversations that you have with that person. And we're all different, right? Like, I don't particularly feel happy if someone says, let's come in and have a chat and meet in my office, and stick a tie on if you can, and they won't let you in the building if you're wearing your trainers, and in you go, and it's very formal. He's on the other side of and I'm not comfortable there. But if you said, like, do you fancy grabbing a coffee and walking around the park? Yeah, I do. And I'll be more relaxed, I'll be more open. And that's your approach. And everyone's different, right? And then it's your behaviors, your body language, and the environment that you're doing it with. And then it's your conversations. It's making sure that the conversations that you have, you're asking them whether they understand what we're talking about. You're making sure that there's that feedback loop is being a closed one, so you know, in a positive way, so you know whether they understand properly, and you're finding different ways to understand if they understand. Because, like, the stuff I learned in Fiji, where they would just say they understood all the time, that was just because they felt uncomfortable talking to me and they wanted to get out quick. So you always say that fast. If you want to leave an uncomfortable situation in the workplace, just say, yeah, I understand, yeah, no problem, got it. And off you go. And you're like, phew, I'm glad I'm out of that now. I haven't got a clue what I'm supposed to be doing, though.
How did so speaking of Fiji, how did you find that? Because it's, I've worked with in the environment I'm in, I've worked with a couple of Fijian athletes, and their culture and the way that they think and the way that they are, it's for us in the UK, for some of us, it's completely alien. So kind of, how did you approach that consistently with an open mind going over there at the start? And then how did you retain and kind of, did you look to shift behaviors, or did you just try and manipulate for your behaviors to suit the environment that you were working in?
Yeah, loads in that question. Upstream first. So, and have you read the book Upstream?
No, no.
So it's 2 brothers, and I tell this story, and I don't tell it very well, but the whole book is really around the principle that, I don't know, like say you and me, Harrison, are walking down the river and we see a kid in the river, and you dive in to save the kid and haul him back to the bank, and like, oh, Harrison, good work, mate. That saved that kid. And then as you turn around, you see actually there's another kid floating down the river. So in you go again and dive and go and get that kid. And as you're seeing the kid come closer to go and grab and save, you see me just disappearing off, wandering upstream. And you're like, Ben, where are you going? You got, I can see another kid coming down. You got to help me out here. It's like, I'm going upstream to find out who threw the kids in. And that's where the principle of upstream and downstream comes in. Don't always look at the origin. Sometimes, don't always look at, in Fijian terms, look at the waterfall, look at where the origin is. Because often what somebody's showing you in front is it's a reaction to something way upstream that you need to understand. So whether you're in Fiji, in Vanuatu, in Lambasa, in one of the outlying towns or villages or small island, or you're in Paris with a French rugby player, or you're in Southall with a year 8 kid, it's all about that upstream, downstream, and taking a breath and understanding the individual. And culturally, I think my leadership is more about making sure that they feel that you're one of us. And if you always have that in your head, that, it's not about you leading and telling people what to do. It's about them feeling that you're one of us and you do things for the us. Then if that's your case, then you've got to understand both the environment and you've got to understand the moment in time that you go into that environment, and that varies hugely. In elite sport, you can get jumped into an elite team that either might be on the verge of promotion or doing really well, or they've just sacked a coach, or they're just about to get relegated, or their star player's just been transferred, or whatever it might be. And so the environment is also one thing, but so's that point in time that you go in. So with Fiji, I had to understand, okay, it's a third world culture. People live in the present. And I had to understand that culture. And then it's also the moment in time was it was a bankrupt union. It had no money. They had been used to a system where they never got any feedback, just got dropped by reading the newspapers. Selectors picked the team for them, and none of them had met those selectors. And so there was no safety at all. And now that was specific to that moment in time, and the bankruptcy, they weren't getting paid, even though they were being promised they were. So there's no trust really. And that was more important perhaps than the culture of going into a different country, was changing that moment in time to feel the trust, to make them feel that I was part of us, not them. I wasn't with the Fijian Rugby Union and being on that side of the fence. I was in with the team all the time, and they felt that I was consistent then in my behaviors. So it's often the same themes. We don't have to have lots of different tools available all the time. You have to be consistent about the ones that you use and be curious.
So how sort of did you manage that with the demands of the on-field rugby as well? Which there's a lot of things that with that environment you need to be thinking about the next tournament that's coming up and everything else. So how do you sort of work that into? We had Tony Philp on from he was part of the performance manager for the New Zealand Sevens. He's now at the Hurricanes.
Yeah, top bloke.
Yeah, he came on and talked about planning periodization, and we had a great chat there about how he broke that down into short, medium, and long-term planning over a sort of a 4-year cycle with the Olympics and stuff, but then also sort of how you need to get the off-field and on-field sort of mirrored within that together. So is that sort of something, how did you manage that sort of with Fiji, juggling them different demands?
Yeah, it's another great question, because strategic planning is massively important. And I'm seeing a trend in elite sport of having people in roles that are almost just doing that. And that strategic planning is as Tony's mentioned, it's not just about some of the outcome stuff as far as, or some of the transactional. So like, you're flying to Vegas, therefore let's work out jet lag, let's work out all the minor details on making that as good a outcome for the athletes when they arrive. And it's not just about physical load, about just making sure you're working your stress cycles and you get, you're peaking and tapering at the right times. It's all part of that. But it's also about the other stuff off the field that you're doing around strategic planning, around of understanding the individual. So it can become quite complicated getting the planning right, but it's also one of my favorite things to do, because you set your plan in place, and that might be, for me, with Fiji, it might have been a 3-year plan, because I was there for 3 years. I knew my last tournament would be the Olympics if we got there, and you put the basic fundamentals in to start with. So for me, my building blocks were right. I know when the tournaments are. I know when I can start to then look at where I'm going to make selection. I know when we're going to have our then from there we go, right, these are our blocks where we're going to train. And I know that I'm going to use a periodization model where it's kind of 4-week stress cycles where, they come in and I'll slowly load them until we taper going into a tournament. That means that I know when my rest times are and when my breaks are. And then you put those in place. So then you look at it and go, okay, all right, I can start to see, my foundations here. And then you think, right, okay, let's start to look at individualization of this. Let's look at what else do I want to do? Well, I might want to, because we've got some guiding principles that we might want to win the world title before the Olympic Games, but it's not our number one priority. The Olympic Games is. So how are we going to go about trying to achieve both? Well, we don't have to get them as fit as we want in that final year, because we want to get a lift in that Olympic period of training. So yeah, we fatten them up a little bit for those first few series tournaments. We rotate the team a little bit. That means, okay, let's have a look at the nutrition and how we're going to put that into our planning. We've got the 4-week stress cycles, but maybe we've also got a yo-yo test or a couple of other physical tests that we'll put in. We might put them slightly lower as a standard, because we want to keep them safe as far as maybe help them out not getting injured as much. And then we're getting into the Olympics going, right, well, we're going full throttle here, so I'm going to take them off sugars. I'm going to raise our standards around our fitness and our overall group levels that we need to achieve, and all those sort of things. I might chuck it. I might get an altitude if I can somewhere. I might play around with humidity. I might go, do you know what, we've got 4 weeks where I'm not going to give them water during training, because I want the heat strategy to reflect where we're going into Rio, and all those things then go into your planning. And so it suddenly becomes this really exciting plan where you fiddle around and move it around, knowing that things will come and throw you off course. And it might be stuff that you can't control, like, modern times it's COVID or pandemics. In my time in Fiji, it was a cyclone or illness or bankruptcy again. And those things you can't control. But if you don't have your plan that's really detailed and agile, then when those things happen, you can't go, okay, right, this is going to affect this. That's okay, because we can twiddle with this and we can get back into the plan here. And so I love doing this and testing people's plans. So if I'm in a football club or I'm doing some stuff with the French rugby teams, I'll look at their planification in France, and you go, okay, have you thought about this? What about this? How does this link into what you want to get out of the season? Because often coaches and strategists and people, high performance managers, will look at it purely from almost a transactional thing. So they will look at it from, we've got to go from A to B, we've got to come back, we've got this amount of time to rest, and they'll look at it like that, and they won't get into the nuances where you can make a plan give you an advantage, no doubt about it. And whether that's questioning, should we have our day off here? Should we train at 10 in the morning when we've got the lowest average age in the Football League, and we know from research that they will not be at their best as an 18, 19-year-old at 10 in the morning. They will be better at 2 in the afternoon, and they will have a lot of energy at night. So why aren't we training at 2? And why we do play at 3 o'clock as well on Saturday most. So why aren't we? And so question some of the stuff that you get, even in the highest levels of professional sport, saying, oh, we've always done that, or that's not going to make any difference. Well, it might make a small enough difference that might get us a little bit ahead of the people we're about to play on Saturday or Sunday or Friday night.
And that's I think you raised some really good points there, and I think that's the challenge for coaches, is to have that long-term view of approach and actually thinking, I think the other key thing around planning is probably being adaptable. And you like say, I've known coaches, I know myself, in which I've had a plan or put in a curriculum of learning in place. And my first time I did it, I was probably a little bit too rigid, and the benefits weren't quite there. What would be your kind of advice for someone in terms of trying to get that balance between trying to create a plan that they think is going to take them on the path to success, but then also understanding that there are going to be variables and controllables that we're coaches, we're not miracle workers, we can't control everything that we've got our hands on, especially when we're dealing with athletes. So what would be your advice for coaches that want to get into planning and looking at planning, but also have to understand that adaptability is a huge part of that plan as well?
Yeah. So again, and I apologize if I repeat some of the same principles, but kind of that's sport, right? You often reinforce the same things, and guiding principles rule your planning. You've got to be able to, when a plan is, for your example, Harrison, that someone, you've got a rigid plan, but actually it might need to change. Go back to your guiding principles and see, well, okay, yeah, we do need to change it, or no, we don't need to change that, but we can change something else. So that's how you can create the adaptivity around it, by also not going, do you know what, this is our pot that we've just put in the kiln, fired it up, out it comes, it's got its spout, and you take it out and go, actually, 3 months later, that's not working anymore. It's not doing what we're supposed to do. But we'll stick with it because we've agreed that, and we'll smash it up at the end of the season and start again. Well, it's too late by then. Your plan might have drowned you. So you have to be open-minded enough to go, okay, we need to pivot here a little bit, and that will help. You'll help that process by also not having group think and not having too many people that have got those biases around what you're putting in place. So having people from outside to question, and that might also be outside your senior management group. So if the coach and assistant coach and a couple of skills coaches are driving all of this, well, why can't you get an intern to question some of this? And if you've got that will also give you a really good idea on what's our environment like. Can we get someone in from a lower level in the club, and they will feel confident enough to feel open enough to tell us, no, this is no good. Why are you doing this? So you tick quite a lot of boxes by testing out your planning and your decision making by bringing people in from within the organization, but from other areas, and also from airlifting in the occasional consultant, that comes in and says, yeah, no, you're all thinking so narrowly, and you're missing actually what we're trying to achieve here. So that happens, I'd say, in good organizations, that happens organically. There are very few organizations that formally bring people in from lower levels within the organization to test things, but informally they do it all the time. So, I know a really top end Premier League club that constantly the manager and other coaches will be talking to people around the club, that, chefs, security, academy, junior academy staff, academy parents, to get a guide on a few things, to test the situational, like where the club is and where there could be improvements, or ask some questions and get different views from different standpoints. So they do it informally. I don't see too much of the formal stuff going on, but it's incredibly powerful. It tests, and in the military they'll do that quite a lot, where they will do, create that ability to test your culture by having lower ranking people coming in and feel confident to be able to express their opinion safely.
When does that become too much? When does you've got too many opinions coming in, or you're trying to get that balance between, they're still learning the trade, is their opinion, does it matter? I'm not saying it doesn't matter, but does it stand the width, does it stand the test of knowledge and reputation?
Yeah. So culturally, I've seen varying levels of involvement. And again, one of my key principles is involve those that are involved. So, that always questions then how wide do you cast your nets, because you don't want to be a magpie that suddenly sees the next glittery thing, or reads a book, listens to a TED talk or whatever, and go, oh, that bloke, we need to use his principles, or get him or her in to have a chat with us. And also, I've been in cultures like did some work with Dutch, one of the Dutch Olympic sports, and they value the opinion of everyone. So there's people in meetings that you've never seen before that are telling the head coach or performance director, you need to do this or that. And it's like, that's not the right, you then are going to get leakage from the culture, because you're getting people in that are jumping in. They are just spotlight thinking. So they're coming in, they're seeing one moment, 1 day's training, 1 week's training. It's not enough to form a rounded opinion. And yet they're being given airtime to give their thoughts. And so that's devaluing. The head coach or performance director is leaving there going, don't they trust me to do my job? Why have they got this bloke telling this? They don't even realize when they're saying this about some of the stuff that we do. So you have to, it's the art and science of somebody in that organization making sure when you want to, turn up that volume to bring a couple of people in to have a little look, and other times where you go, do you know what, we've got the information where we need it and we're happy with that. And so that's the art and science really in coaching, performance management, and running these sort of things.
So we've talked about sort of a lot of the off-field sort of planning there. What would your approach be to sort of starting to put together sort of an on-field session? What are the key, we'll say maybe non-negotiables, the key standards that you like to set as you're sort of getting out onto the training pitch? And have you got any examples of what that might look like as well?
Yeah. So my methodology for this is I've got inside and outside the guardrails. So guardrails are what are our agreed values and standards. So that might be something really simple like timings, wearing the right kit, having a full water bottle with you in between sessions, whatever it is. And the methodology I have for that, or it could be anything that we decided, is that I'll say this is where I'll bring one in. Let's say I think timings are important. Everyone should be on time. And then the group will go, yeah, okay, I get that. We agree that that's important to us. Say, okay, so over to you. What do you think the consequences are for someone that turns up late? And then so you give it to the group and they'll go, okay, well, this or this. And we go, well, we don't believe in fines, but we think this should happen and we'll deal with it here. Whatever it is, the players will deal with it themselves. And if he becomes a persistent offender, we start to ask you for any involvement. Okay, fine, we've agreed that. Then they own it. And that means when it does get put under pressure, players have that ownership from it. So they tend to value it more. And then that goes into your guardrails, I think, kind of go into my overriding philosophy as well, is that I do want to make myself redundant. I've said it for years, from last 15 years of coaching and leading, that I've always wanted to make myself redundant and give autonomy, because as we all know, team sports, coaches don't have much influence once they get onto the field of play for that 80 or 90 minutes. They might be able to tweak stuff, like I saw on Sunday as a good example. Thomas Frank, Madsbek Sorensen, one of the centre backs, got a yellow card, lucky not to get sent off, and Everton had a man sent off. And so you see Thomas pulling him off as a centre back at half time, making a substitution, changing formation, both to protect that player not getting a red card, but also play upon the fact that Everton are one man down. And you're like, okay, he's actually made a big difference there, but he couldn't do it in game time. He had to do it at the half. And then really in game time, there's not a lot of influence. I'm kind of detouring off on this because lots of stuff overlap, right? So something as simple as allowing the players to decide on what the consequences are for someone turning up late, it's one of my guardrails, but it also ripples into players feeling that they're the ones making decisions on the field, that they can be trusted to make decisions. So once you set your guardrails up, then inside that you're creating, and I know it's become a very cool thing to say all the time, but you're creating that psychological safety that allows people to be their best versions. And we, as we talked about earlier, everyone is individual, so they do things differently, but within agreed guardrails. And so once you set that up, then when you're on into the more technical and tactical stuff, I like to look at two things. I do, and Pareto's principle number one. So, that suggests 80% of the success is based on 20% of the things you do. I'm not too hung up on the actual percentages, but the principle that there will be 2 or 3 or 4 fundamental things that give you your biggest bang for your buck. And so that might be the movement that you adopt in attack. You might be having an offloading game that really requires people to be inside, outside, and behind the ball most of the time. So that's one of your fundamentals that is going to provide success. And so it creates then for you in your planning that you've got to spend quite a lot of time on that principle, because it brings the biggest bang for the buck. So you start to put them in and work out what you want to achieve, and that they fill your fundamentals around that. And then also every team has what I call trampolines, and trampolines are things you do that accelerate your performance. So that might be, we have got this unbelievable number 8. He can do all sorts of things. So what's our gut? Right, he gets injured quite a lot, and doesn't get fit very much. Okay, I need to have a chat with everyone about our guardrails, and that perhaps he might be an outlier and not reach our standards that we're saying we need everyone to achieve. Explain what to the team that he needs to be in the team for these amount of reasons. Also that we need to protect him from injuries, so we're going to do this, this, and this. And he's a trampoline, but there's still some work around that. Or it might be we've got an amazing, the way we play at home because of the way that the pitch is set up or whatever it is. We're not going to lose at home, so we make sure we put a real trampoline around our preparations for our home games. Or it might be, it could be anything really that you look at and go, yeah, that it's going to accelerate our performances. And you do this Pareto's principle, and you do this trampoline down to the individuals as well. So you've got your team collective, and you might even go wider, and you've got your organization. You go to your team, and then you go to individuals, and they base my fundamental planning around what you do on the pitch and day to day, and what your coaches are doing on the pitch day to day. And that, as well as I'm a big believer in at the top end that don't forget about your fundamentals. So, I've seen lots of very good practitioners do constant fundamentals. So let's take rugby: catch, pass, tackle, kick, decision make. It's like your diet of 5 things that if you do those really well at a high class, you're going to be a decent team. But the amount of times that I haven't seen international players or Prem players practicing the technical aspects of their tackle, or I'm watching a warm up. Watched a Premiership warm up a couple of weeks ago, and they were just doing some passing, but no one was putting their hands up to receive the ball and to create a target, and no one was chasing their hands through except one halfback. They were dropping their hands as well. So for me, I'm looking at it and going, I should be picking that. If I was on the field there, I know it's just a warm up, but it's really crucial to a window into the standards. And I'm like, why haven't they got their hands up? Why isn't he chasing his feet? Why is he not squaring off? All these various things that the coaches weren't looking at because they weren't looking at the fundamentals and picking up on it. That's a core principle of me all the time. So, and I was rubbish at it. And I think I've said this story a few times before, but I was doing my level 3. And Lynn Evans was my coach, moderator, who's a great bloke. And one of Pierre Villeprez's disciples, another amazing person. And I did my session. It looked really neat and tidy, no drop balls, all that sort of stuff. And I was like, oh, he said, what do you think? I thought it was brilliant. I was really happy. He said, your warm up pile of shit. It's like, well, what do you mean? It's like, well, you didn't do this, you didn't look at the hat. And I was like, yeah. And it was a real mic drop moment for me as a young coach going, yeah, like it doesn't matter how fancy and how clever or tactically smart you think you are. If you are not picking up on those basics all the time, then fundamentally you're not going to be maximizing the players and the team. So it's always stayed with me. And, like I've done some work in the NBA, and they'll be so rigid on making sure that those small moments are constantly practiced, like a defender's crowding you and you've got to take 2 steps, and on that second step, as you're in transit going backwards, you've got to try to get a shot off. That happens a lot in the NBA, and so they will therefore practice that incessantly, and you'll see the star players constantly doing stuff. And I think a trend is coming down the track down some detail. So look, I mean, obviously someone like Dave Aldred set the standard as far as but striking the ball, like passing, and I'll use an example like Brentford, when Ericsson's come into the team, he's changed the team totally, like, and his passing is unbelievable. So I'm also thinking, right, well, team needs to have a few more people that can pass that. So who can we, who's available that if I was involved there or at another club, you're going, right, well, that would make benefit to spend some time on both the passing and then the detailing around that. And maybe there's someone that could be involved in that, because I think that's something that is coming down the track as far as the detail that you'll see in America. And you can always kind of have an eye on things when you just see what sort of personnel are getting put into jobs in the NFL and the NBA and NHL, because that's coming down the track, because we're behind them just on the age of professional sport really in this country. So lots of random thoughts there that I just fired off at you.
No, it's although all I think very interesting points, and I think as coaches, a lot of us can lose that focus of just basic fundamentals. And it was actually we had Alison Annan from Netherlands hockey. She came on. It was actually really refreshing to hear her talk around her coaching philosophy of, like, can they nail the fundamentals, and then all her game plan is then up in the tempo, because her belief is, right, if they could pass the ball, move the ball quicker than anyone else with the accuracy on point, then that's how she saw them winning the gold medal at the Olympics. And I think we kind of, as a young coach myself, and I think on my journey, it's almost quite shocking to hear that these elite coaches at the top of their games are still banging home the fundamentals, and like I said, layering on those details as they're going along. How was it? So what's your advice for like a coach that's constantly losing sight of? I guess it's coming back to the reflection process.
Yeah. I mean, and Alison's a great coach, and she's had magnificent success, like in Australia and in Holland, and she's probably, from what you just said, and I would say, I can think of some other world-class coaches where they have just a few practices. They don't have many, and then what they can do is play with the intensity and the size and decision making within that. And one thought I had there as well was, like, when I became, like, my first job, like proper job coaching in school at St Edward's, Oxford, and I was director of rugby and doing athletics, head of PE, and you basically got a chance then to make a blueprint for that school and everything. I literally thought I knew everything. I honestly thought, like, you're coming up against these other people in schools and you're like, oh, they don't know what they're doing. I know it all. And 25 years later, I'm now like, God, I don't know very much. And you go through that cycle, and I see it with young coaches where I'm in doing something and they honestly have just finished their UEFA license or their degree, and they think they know literally everything there is. And it's, I can understand that, because a lot of their stuff is fresh from in their memory and they've just graduated or whatever. And it will take them a few years for them to realize, actually, there's so much that I don't know. And then you go back to, right, well, what, I've seen young coaches that you look at their plan and they've got a 2-week coaching plan, and every session is different. And they're like, oh, this one's for that one's for that. It's like, firstly, cognitively, have you thought about how much load you're putting into these players? Like, you're giving them something different, a different thing all the time. Also, like, what are you trying to achieve here? Because you want them to play a certain way, but then you've got 20 different practices in 2 weeks. You got up the road to Man City and Pep's got 6, and he's a pretty good coach. And he's not doing that because, oh, can anyone help me out? Well, 7th practice, anyone got anything? It's because he understands this is what is important to making them win. And within that, he'll be able to see the intensity, the duration, the size of field or pitch, and he'll put particular emphasis on their first touch. And, you know, and that will be, you know, I was at City last week, and one of the coaches was telling me how he stopped a session Pep for about 20 minutes to basically just hammer home the principles, because somebody just taking the ball on a half turn, you know, and you take it so you can flow and quickly open up a passing channel, and he just took half a second too long, and he stopped it on that. And that just shows you, like, when you got a master coach like that, that he sees those small things and can immediately get involved in it and stop and reinforce to everyone. That is so fundamentally important. Whereas most coaches, for 99% of the time, they just wouldn't even, A, they wouldn't have noticed it, and B, they wouldn't have stopped the practice, because they wouldn't have seen the how important it will be for them in the future. So yeah, that's my thoughts really on what you said about Allison.
Yeah, I think you hit on some great points, and especially with, I remember my first coaching gig. It was a placement opportunity whilst I was studying at university, and I was coaching under 14s, and the only kind of experience I had in rugby before was coming through the academy system at Northampton. So I had all of these kind of exercises and games in my mind that were for an academy level, and all of a sudden I'm doing it with these under 14s, because at the time I didn't know any different. And I think I reflect back on that kind of now, and I just think, what on earth was I thinking? And actually, you know, I've kind of, like, for me on a personal level, I've grown to that, enjoying knowing the unknown, and there's still so much to learn within coaching. And that's a challenge I think that young coaches kind of go through. And a good task that Kris and I had to do on the Masters, also at Leeds Beckett, was throughout our coaching journey, we had to break it down into chapters and give those chapters titles, and actually try and justify those titles. And actually that began the reflection process for me of where kind of an appreciation of, like, all the mistakes that I was making. And like, I'm still going to make mistakes going forward as a coach, because it's never black or white coaching, is it? But it takes, and you give that Pep Guardiola example. It takes balls to stop a session, and
it does maybe at younger, if you're it doesn't for Pep, for example, and it wouldn't for you know, if you're confident in your competencies, then you're immediately, you go, I know the importance. And then it goes back to kind of some off-field stuff. You know, the standard you walk past is the standard that you become. If you set your guardrails around, and you know, I've stuffed up on this many times in the past, you know, you see bad behaviors that are going against what our values are, and you ignore them. You know that somewhere down the track, that's going to bite you in the arse. It might not be that weekend, but somewhere down the track. And that's for someone, you know, misbehaving, being rude to someone. That's like an off-field value. But it's exactly the same on pitch. If you just decide to not pick someone up for a bad tackle technique or a pass or something really small, but you know it's really important, your performances will suffer at some point down the track. And you probably even know it. You'll see it and go, oh, I know I should have done that. And it's part of our learning, right? But it's so valuable to be able to have that ability to see the bigger picture and not be afraid to go, you know, this is what it's all about.
Have you ever had an experience, or, I mean, we've talked a lot about the players sort of taking that ownership as well, where players maybe just seen that evidence of a bad behavior with a specific skill or recognize something, actually took action within the group rather than being coach linked? We had Mark Bennett on talking about sort of player first, player last. And that we've had quite a lot of coaches sort of feedback about how important that message alone was, of trying to get the players to take that ownership, to be able to call out certain things on the pitch, because that's growing for when they are making decisions on the field. They can react to the different situations and pressures that a game might create.
Yeah. So I can give you examples of where players have taken control of the situation, and I haven't had to intercede on a number. And Fiji was the best one for that. And so I would perhaps, I don't know, I've seen one moment I remember where I'd done a breakdown practice, because we don't like having any breakdowns in Fiji, but they don't practice them either as a result. So the ones you do have are pretty rubbish normally. So you think, right, let's spend some time making sure that at least we know that there's some breakdowns, we're going to be good at it. So I did this little practice, and then it was part of the day. I went home. The following morning, I was just driving in early to put some cones out, and they were already there on the field doing my practice, and they were running it themselves, and they saw the importance of it and put the value on that. And I've had stuff in training where players have, I remember Oscar once when I was like when I was new to my job at Fiji, I was trying to get them to stop tackling high. And, it wasn't because they were angry and wanted to whack someone's head off. It's just because culturally you play up here, and I could put my hands around my shoulders because the ball's up high because you play an offloading game growing up and it's one touch. So everyone goes for the ball, and if they miss the ball, they go in high. And so every time they were making a high tackle in training, I was stopping and I was going, no, look, fellas, like, let's get the technical right, hands up, heads up, on our toes, accelerate, settle, hit, wrap the tackle, all that sort of stuff. And Oscar's like, no, Ben, this is just all wrong. They don't care about that. It's like, they'll make a change if you see a bad tackle, just get us running around the pitch a few times every time. And I was like, all right. And so that's what happened. And every time they made a bad tackle, I go right around the pitch, and did the same with when I said I wanted good body language. So if anyone puts their hands on their knees, we'll do 10 burpees and 300 burpees after that first session. And then the following day, it was down to about 30, and then it disappeared from. And so that's not how you'd normally want to coach, but that's what fitted the players, and that's what they responded to. And I've been in clubs where players have stop sessions. They put a little structure around it. So a team might have been said, like, if you're not see the standard of the warm up at the right level or the first practice, as players, you are allowed to stop it and intervene. And also, I've been at clubs where they've marked coaches afterwards publicly. So they've got in around after the training session and gone, right, what we're given is it, and it's normally two numbers, either it's not good enough or it's good enough. So like a 0 or a 10, and then explain why they've got a 0. You got a 0 today because you change around the different practices too much. You didn't pick up on this player that was moaning too much, and we've given it a 0. It might be a 10 because this, and this. And so that's quite good as well, to start to provide a culture where players feel they can speak up. And so it's no good just saying, look, fellas, if anything goes wrong on the field or you're seeing some standards that are dropping, then jump in and pick it up. They won't do that unless they're used to having a culture of being able to do that in meetings, in training, influencing, your away day travel, whatever it is, so that they feel, yeah, I can stop it. It's not good enough. So it's definitely the way forward as coaches to allow that, and to know when players aren't feeling what you're feeling, and to accept it and to change it, because then that will give trust and ownership. And then we all know that leads to better behaviors and better performances.
I think just on that, I think the phrase that I hear from a fellow podcast is the talk around cultural architects. And like you picking up a point that you mentioned earlier about you want to become redundant. And a good example of that, I think I've heard Rio Ferdinand speak around his experiences at Manchester United, in which if Sir Alex Ferguson wasn't there for a week, everything would have still, the clogs that he's put in place would carry on turning. And I think I'm all for giving the players a voice, but there's also the kind of coaches that, right, it goes back to what we're talking about around the balance. When is giving the players too much of a voice? Because you look at football as an example, elite football. It's not the players that are going to go out the door if things aren't working. If things aren't working, it solely relies upon the managers or the head coach's feet. So when is that cut-off point of, well, I am the head coach. I'm making this decision whether you like it or not.
Yeah, a couple of things there that I'm picking up on. Yeah, the cultural architects piece, like, Sven-Göran Eriksson talked about it when he was England manager ages and ages ago, and it was something that kind of stayed with me, and I use that term for I don't know for how long, decade plus. But also, like I had on my pod, I had a guy called Andy Milburn, that's a retired colonel in the US Marines, and he talked about the importance of understanding who the architects are, that, you know, but also understand where the culture power brokers are, and they're the ones that might not be architects. They might want to blow that building to smithereens, and they're very influential, you know. And if you get them on the wrong side, then they can also deteriorate culture and environment. So understand both of those: the architects that will be thinking and behaving, and your role models and helping to accelerate performance, but also the power brokers, because you need to get them involved as well and find ways of making sure that that power is used in a positive manner. For the other stuff around that, you know, the balance between allowing players a voice and autonomy and deciding as a coach there's certain things that, you know, non-negotiables that you need to lead from. Something that, you know, a simple framework for that is understanding what's below and above the line. So I'm sure you've come across this, but if, like, again, I'll use a real basic one. My Fiji time, they were not fit enough. So I said to them, you know, the levels aren't fit enough, so I'm going to drive this. Like, you're not going to have much say in any of this. I'm going to get you up at 6 a.m. We're going to run up sand dunes. We're going to be doing diagonals and suicides and old school stuff. And I explained why. This is why. And once we get to this standard where you're hitting this level, and I explained why it was this level and how it compared us to other people in the world, then we're over the line, and you are starting to have a voice on how you want that to look like as far as preparing. And you put a time frame on that as well. And that's when you don't get confusion, because athletes might go, hold on, he said he's all for voice and stuff, but we've just come off the field of 90 minutes where he's just made us do, you know, burpees and suicides and everything else. He's talking out of his ass. That's not at all. But if you explain it, then there are certain things that's the case. And it will be tactical stuff will be the same as well. If you come into a culture where they are used to being told, this is our formation, in possession, out possession, when we're away from home, when this bloke's playing, we play like this. And suddenly you come in and go, well, we've got a real flexible in and out of possession here. We're going to do this. If you try to go too far, it will just blow their minds. So there needs to be some steps. So that's all stuff that we know, but sometimes as coaches, you assume that they all understand that, and then you don't actually narrate it. So that's where you get surprised as coach. Oh, I thought you knew all that. Well, we didn't, because you didn't tell us. And sometimes we do stay in our heads a lot as coaches and not always think, actually, what's wrong with narrating? This is why we're doing this. And this is why I'm taking more control today. And tomorrow, this is why I'm not taking as much control. So they understand. Then you've got to go back to that consistency and clarity. You know, and it is all around the simple things, but it is all around your awareness to be able to do them regularly at the right level.
I think there's lots of stuff there that within sort of the planning and on-field stuff that I think a lot of coaches will be able to take away. I suppose that one of the last sort of key bits to really chat about is that decide how we reflect and the importance of reflection, because I know it's definitely something that I've got better at, but it's something that I've had to really work on, because it's quite hard to reflect both on the positives and the negatives. How have you sort of done that when reviewing not only sort of individual sessions, but also then the overall program? So sort of when you left Fiji, what sort of reflection process did you go through there? Or maybe when you left England and then started with Fiji, was there some sort of, what reflection did you learn from that you then transferred over, and sort of how did you go about that?
Yeah, probably to provide the best stark example, it would be my period between England and Fiji. And actually within England, a couple of periods within England where I didn't have the awareness of how I was performing as a coach. So and therefore accepting critical reflection and review from other people in my group. So, you know, my last year of England, I was fighting with my boss to get some planning in on England Sevens and have some strategy around it, not just season to season, but a proper plan that required budget and required backing. And I was just I was fighting to the point where I'd lost all ability to accept any feedback from anyone. So I'd be blind to it all and be driving hard towards this goal of making sure this happened. And I changed the defensive system when the defense coach wasn't around, because I suddenly saw something and thought, oh, this isn't working, change this. Broke that relationship as a result of that. And then same with some of the other the physios or the medics and people. I would just listen to them, so if I was training them too hard or not enough or whatever. And it was only kind of near the end of that when I was like, realized I just kind of let go of it and thought, well, I'm going to leave anyway at the end of this season, that I suddenly just got that awareness back. And then we went into a good last 2 or 3 months where we hit World Cup final and things like that. And it came back to me, and it was a big lesson in when I went to Fiji. I had a period of reflection, not long. I talked to Stuart Lancaster about this, between his time between England and Leinster. He had about 9 months, I think, maybe a bit less. And he had a lot of reflection time there. I had less. I probably had, I don't know, a month, 6 weeks, but it was easily enough for me to have had time to reflect on the rubbish stuff that I had just done, and how I had then managed to have some awareness about it, and actually a couple of players were the ones that kind of brought me round. Like, they didn't particularly give me smelling salts, but they kind of, by their words, I remember, and Rob Vickerman, a big shout out to him. He was one captain at the time. We had a very honest conversation around everything that kind of resuscitated me and got me back to being a good version of myself. I was like, that was almost my number one priority. Was like, right, I've got to go back to being my best, why I do what I do, which is help people be their best version, because that had disappeared, and that should never leave whatever I ever do again. And it hasn't. There's been, other stuff that's come in and come out, but my priority on helping people be their best version from, month before the Rugby World Cup in 2013 to today, that has not changed for a second. So it was a big moment for me in that reflection. If I go to some sort of system reflections, and maybe a question to you guys, like, I get this quite a lot, and I'd love to know what your view on it is. Hot reviews, right? Finish a game, football, let's say just say they just lost 2-1, last minute goal. And I'm in there, right? And the coaches are like, I'm not going to speak to them now. They're too emotional. Give them 10, 15 minutes, or, I'll let them go home and I'll pick it up on Monday or Sunday. And that's the view. And I hear that quite a lot. I'm not speaking to them straight after the game. Special forces, straight after something they've just done, where people have probably been injured or lost their life, and they have hot review immediately. Now, why do they do that? Even though their emotions are high, because they probably get some genuinely good feedback. And you do want to know, for example, I would want to know, well, I'll throw it back, because I asked you a question, then I started answering it. But so I'll throw it back to you. Where do you feel on that? What would you do after a game you just lost? What's the value in getting quick feedback or latent feedback?
I think there was an example I saw on Twitter, and I can't remember who it was, where a coach actually had the players, I think it was a football example, we're on the pitch, and the players were generally leading that hot review with them just asking questions, so they got that clarity straight away. I think one of the things that it was when we spoke to Mark, really, sort of with the player first, player last, I realised that in that situation, it is always me that's being given the feedback, when actually we probably need to include the players more in getting them to feedback. Then they feel comfortable to, like you said before, around one, they're taking accountability for some of the stuff, but then acceptance and awareness of some of the decisions that they've made. So I think in the moment, I think sometimes on emotions, that's when maybe the players are going to give you the more honest feedback than if they take away and digest and reflect. That might make some people more insular than actually giving their overall view. But then also, if you just tell them that they've been crap, for example, what impact's that going to have as well with you sort of giving them a tell off? So I think it's important to have the review in that situation.
Yeah, you put that nicely. How you give that review and how the approach is, because yeah, that's how I feel about it. And I'd kind of add that one other layer that would be really useful for me as a coach is if you're going in and you're having hot feedback and you're asking players questions about, what you think happened here or happened there. You'd be surprised at how they might say they'll just talk you through, they'll play out a situation. Maybe, they'll explain, what happened to the last goal. Maybe it's off a corner, and they'll explain it to you. And then you go back and look at the video and go, it's totally different. He just said that defend that the attacker just lost him and they put a screen in or whatever it was. And you look at it and go, no, that's not true at all. He wasn't paying attention. And so that gives you a great opportunity to go, there's a cognitive load issue here. They're not quite understanding it. And so there's massive learning. But it's really awkward for a lot of coaches to go in. It's easy to do your hot review on the pitch in pre-season. You just won 3-0. It's very hard to do it when you've lost last minute because someone's made a mistake or it's a game that's put you in trouble. But that is a great conversation to have as a group, even if it's so uncomfortable. And like you said, Kris, if you then have the right framework on how you're going to have that conversation, I see massive value in that. And I know a Premier League coach, manager, that in his whole career, he's never gone into the changing room after games, doesn't go in. And I think he's losing an opportunity there because he's missing out on genuinely uncomfortable, but potentially great information to help him and the team get better over the years. And he's never done it from first team he coached in the lower level to where he is now in the Premier League.
There was even the example of, Harrison, with Ancelotti at the game of the week where he was actually asking his influential players around the subs that he should potentially make. And, I think that's people were sort of saying, this is outstanding, a top level coach asking his players. And I was sat there going, well, surely the best coaches are doing that. They're including the players within that discussion because in that situation, the players probably know who's going to have the biggest impact from their personal experiences of playing with them that's going to have an impact on the result.
But then for that example, he's won pretty much everything, hasn't he? And he's very successful. So he's absolutely, clear and happy that, he's comfortable with his knowledge. He's got a big old library of knowledge. So his ego's not really coming into it when he's asking these players, because he's like, well, look, I'm pretty much the British Library here. I've got knowledge on everything. Got a bloke just come in to buy a book. I'm going to listen to him, because he's of value, and he's not going to hurt me if he says something that I'm not thinking about. I'll be open to it. It's the coaches then that the ego's there front and center, and they do not want that because they'll have in their heads, if I'm asking the players, then I've got the owner that is going to be, knocking on my door, especially if we lose. Like, why are you asking the players? Don't you know what you're doing? I remember an old mate that was a teacher that was like, I'm trying to help the players learn, so I'm not coming on at half time. So the players can come on at half time. The players can sort stuff out, organize, decide on things like if we're going to make any subs. And the headmaster got 3 letters the following Monday from parents going, you've got this new coach. He doesn't care. Doesn't even come on at half time. So that message has to be, there is an element also at pro level there that Ancelotti's different because, he's at another level, but to up manage and say to the owner or the performance director or whatever, director of football or director of rugby, this is a policy that we're trying to do, and this is the reasons why. And then they go, yeah, all right, I get this. So then when it says that, and the owner goes, why has he done that? It's like, oh, this is actually why he's done it. This. Oh, right, get it. Oh, that's cool. So that there is kind of knitting it all together, I suppose. And so there's some thinking needed around all of that. And, you can't, unfortunately, you do have to make sure that everybody's aware of what you're doing so that you don't get those curveballs that can cause problems.
I'll just reiterate what you kind of said. I think there's it takes bravery to do those hot reviews. And actually, I think for me, it actually sparks really positive conversations when you sit down and do cold reviews. Like I say, it's a powerful learning tool, especially when players are not they watch something back and it's slightly different. But also it's when you're that when the emotions are that high, that's like Kris says, you're gonna get that honesty that you probably wouldn't get a day later because they were fearful of what the coach might think of them. And actually, if the coach is, if you're a coach and you're willing to, in the heat of that battle, and to get highly emotionally charged, honest review, that can spark some really powerful conversations in the following days to, either for me, it's affirming that we're on the right path, or do I need to make a couple of changes to the environment and the culture that I've created? So that's
or even that athlete, that player that you're speaking to, if they're highly emotive, they're giving you information that's actually wrong because they're fogged up by all of that stuff, then that gives you another great opportunity to have that conversation a bit later and going, like, I need to help you find more clarity when you're under pressure and the emotions are high. And so here's a great opportunity. So there's so many different things that you can help with and be curious with when you have those awkward moments. And as long as coaches you're like, all right, take a breath here. I'm not going to enjoy this for a while. And my ego's going to get bashed to smithereens, but I know this is going to make this better. It goes back to guiding principles, right? Ask yourself that question. You just lost a game 2-0. Going into your manager's room and having a beer with the other manager, or saying how bad the team is with that regarding, or you go in and you have a really not difficult conversation. Guiding principle, will it make the team better? Yes. Going into the change room, no. Having a beer with the rest of the staff, right? There you go.
Simple way to make the decision there. And it's been absolutely fascinating chatting to you, and I think it's been a great way to sort of sum up sort of what we've been chatting about in the season around coaching skills and give some insight around sort of the overall sort of package. I suppose just as a bit of a closing bit, what would your advice be for the community coach that's working with sort of players twice a week in games on Saturday? What advice would you give to them around sort of how they approach their coaching and sort of for them to make sure they're doing, like you sort of said, making sure that they're being the best version of themselves, but also delivering the best for their players?
Yeah, so you definitely have to have some personal planning around that. And so if you're a coach, community coach twice a week, whatever, set 3 things that you want to achieve. See that, every session. And if that's making sure players have fun, making sure players, learn or get better, and making sure that maybe there's a movement thing around making sure people are moving around and not static for 90%, whatever it is, share that with the group, because you want them to know that that's what you want every session, for them to go, didn't enjoy it today, or really enjoyed it today, or didn't do that, or I was just standing around for this or that, or whatever it is. So I think have a clear kind of menu of what you want to achieve, and then share it with the people that you want to share it with, and so that you can just keep yourself on track. And that's really the easiest way to get things going. And from that real simple plan, there'll be other stuff that suddenly will pop out from that during the season. But that's a good, strong single brick of foundation that allows you just to get most of what you're doing right by reflecting on that.
I think that's a great way to finish. Ben, thank you very much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. I got loads of notes here, which is...
No, I've enjoyed it as well. Thanks. Really good questions. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Harrison, what a great guest to sort of finish up what's been a great season around sort of coaching skills.
Yeah. Oh, what a chat. What a conversation. And it's another one of those in which I could have spent a whole day just sat there picking his brain. The environments he's been in, the stuff that he was willing to share with us. It was awesome to have him on, and to wrap up everything we've kind of covered so far in this season. I don't think we could. It's not a better way to end it, really, is it?
Yeah, there was so many little bits of knowledge that he sort of shared with us from his experience that I think coaches at all levels can utilize and take stuff away from. Just about the way he kicked off around having that openness as a coach, and that upstream first. I mean, that's something that I'd sort of not really heard of before, but it's probably definitely another book that will end up in the Amazon shopping basket.
Yeah, this pod's cost me a lot of money because I just keep buying all the books that we've been telling to read. I've got books coming to my eyes at the moment, but it's it's a really clever concept as well, isn't it? In terms of trying to understand, and it goes back to everything, the kind of the key principles that we've spoken on with every coach. It's understanding the players, understanding the person rather than just the athlete, and going back to the source of everything and trying to understand, who they are fundamentally and what's going on away from the rugby field, away from the rugby environment that impacts the behaviours that you see. I think you and I can both think of examples in which we've had players that have kind of acted out or have not quite been themselves, and that's might have disrupted the session. But there's two ways you can go about it. You can be ultra aggressive and isolate them, or you can like Ben's suggested, we can understand and actually can we build the foundations there to make sure that he's becoming the best version of himself. And I love that as a founding principle for him in every environment that he goes into.
I think that was what was quite clear from chatting to Ben, though, was that he has these guiding principles that he sort of tries to live by within the environments that he's trying to create. And I really like the idea of having the guardrails, the guardrails that he spoke about around, allowing them, the players, once you've got these behaviours sort of come up, that the players would then take sort of ownership and be involved in the creation of what they would actually look like, and that you want to involve those that are involved. And that again is something that we spoke about a lot with both Richard Smith. Phil Davies touched on it as well, but then also it was a key thing of what sort of Frank Dick spoke about at the end of last season as well. And I think that's quite common, and it's one of these things that we sort of get told as a coach, that you need to include the players when coming up with these key sort of behaviours that we want to see sort of on and off field.
Yeah, it goes back to that idea around ownership, and actually, there are certain non-negotiables that we should have as a coach, but how we enforce them is very much right. You as a collective, as a team, own it. And if it's a repeat offender, that's when we can look to it. That's when we can think about intervention from a coach standpoint. But then actually giving them the parameters to say, right, can we call out these behaviours? And the positive is the players doing it within the session, and there's not just players on players, the players on coach. But if we're gonna put these these guardrails in, now surely for us as coaches, we go back to coaching behaviours that we discussed with Neil Holmes, right? We should live and we should die by that sword as well. Because if we're not upholding those fundamentals within that, then how on earth can we expect players to? And I love the fact that he was, and that even that small little thing of, right, can you rank the coaches at from either 0 or 10 and give justifications for it? No, you didn't pull the player up because of X, Y, or Z. Well, yeah, that's our roles. And if we're gonna nail the fundamentals and nail the basics and have these guardrails in place, then we've got to live up to that.
I think that's an interesting one, because there'll be a lot of coaches listening that will be fearful of doing a task like that. But you're kind of not only doing yourself an injustice, but you're doing your participants an injustice as well by not asking them for feedback about how you're doing. And you touched on it, that we're constantly learning. You can't accept that you need to be the person that knows everything, because that's not the case. Everything's evolving, everything's changing all the time. You've got to be able to actually, if a player said that you've had this negative impact, you've not done something like you said around the behaviours that we've established and that we need to live by, you kind of do need to be called out for that in order to keep that alignment, keep that trust. And that's one of the key things that Ben spoke about a lot as well.
Yeah, trust. And it goes back to the kind of key conversation we have with all sorts of coaches, right? The fundamentals is building the relationship, building the rapport. And he talked around trust and clarity, and he does that through the 3 C's of curiosity, clarity, and then consistency. Now, if we've got those in place, then the players, that's how they build the rapport, that's how they build the trust, and that's when we can start pushing the boundaries of our relationship between it, because it's got to be a two-way thing for us to be able to get the best out of them. And it's that's massively powerful. I think out of everything that kind of he said during the last that kind of covered in the last hour, the one that kind of struck me most was him wanting to become redundant within the system. Now that is kind of ultimate leadership. Honestly, it's just to say that, right, I want to create an environment which is or a self-serving organism that just constantly is updating itself and upholding the values that you're willing to input and they're willing to trust and be guided on, to make yourself redundant, is that not the ultimate form of leadership, Kris?
Yeah, and I think it's probably I think it takes great confidence in yourself to be able to say that is your actual goal, because and I think that says a lot about Ben, that he's willing to put his hands up and say that is the case, and that is what he wants to do. And if you're willing, I think it goes back to what he said around his guiding principles. Is if you've got a belief of sort of how it could go and where you want it to be, then yeah, if you've left it in a better place, then you can move on to the next task and then start again, I suppose. And that shows great confidence in sort of and belief in what you do and why you do it. I mean, we covered a lot of stuff around off field with Ben around the planning and the reflection and side of things. And I found it really interesting when we got onto some on field stuff, and he spoke about the, linking into the stuff that Alison and Anne said around the coaching environment and keeping it simple, was, just having your two to four fundamentals that you want to live by, and that within your taking tack, 80% of success is based on the 20% that you do. Yeah, I think that for me is when you're thinking about planning, and the idea that Pep Guardiola only has 6 sessions that he uses and he just changes the tempo. You'll have coaches that will have books and books and books of all these different games that they want to do. And actually, what benefit is that having to the results that you're then going to have on a match day?
Oh, yeah. 100%. And I think, especially with, a lot of sports, as coaches, we can overcomplicate it. And I think a phrase that you and I have become very much accustomed to is, like, how can we simplify the complexity of our sport? And and like I said in the episode, it was when I first heard it come from Alison and Anne's mouth, it was so refreshing to hear, and then to hear that backed up by someone like Pep Guardiola, who, I'm not gonna lie, I idolise the guy. He's from, in terms of like just watching All or Nothing when he was on the Amazon Prime. It's you can see the kind of the culture and the character that he is and what he's trying to build at Manchester City, but one thing I would say it was important to note is that, yes, he might have stopped the session and done 20 minutes talking around why that half a second. I think it's important to just to note on that that's not something we have to do at a grassroots level. I don't know if we've got a big takeaway from this is, right, Pep Guardiola is fortunate, and if we were going out on a Tuesday and a Thursday when we've got an hour out on the pitch, we can't stop the pitch and we can't stop and do 20 minutes of the importance of having our hands up or the smaller details. Right, the skill for us as grassroots coaches is, right, how can we do that a little bit quicker? And that's why I loved his final point, his concluding thing of having a clear menu of 3 things for the week or the block of sessions, and actually being honest to share that with the players means that they're in on that journey and they can give you that feedback straight away.
And I like that a lot. But I also think that linked in really nicely to what we spoke about with Dave Sharkey as well around theming, and you can sort of blend them two together of, right, this is what we want to try and achieve. It goes down to what Tony said as well around planning periodization. Know where you get, start with the end in mind, know where you want to be by the end of that journey, map out the goals that you want to have. And then I think the key thing that you might want to take away now is how you take that menu of the things that you want to get out of it and then connect it with the theming stuff that we spoke about with Dave and get the buy-in from the players, because you could go down and write them 3 things down of what you want to achieve. But if you don't include the players either within that first stage group about what you want to achieve and why, because that's when you link it into what you said around the cultural architects. They're the ones that are going to help sort of influence that. But actually, I never thought around finding the power brokers as well, because they're the ones that are going to be trying to knock the culture architects down.
Yeah, and I think it's and it's interesting. It just goes back to, like you said right at the beginning, as we go full circle now. It's right, we've got to be clear, we've got to be trusting, we've got to be clarity with the players. And like for him, he said he's big on giving players a voice, but when it's a session or it's a part of the game that they really need to work on, he needs to have ownership on it as a coach. He tells them, right, this is why we're doing it. I want to do this for the next 3 weeks. And these kind of sessions the next 3 weeks are going to be like this. with me and with my voice in charge, because what is it? Do we put them in the shade like mushrooms and treat them like bullshit, or do we be honest with them and give them the sunlight and honesty to make them into silver ferns? Now that applies. I think that applies to almost every podcast we've had so far. It's a go-to phrase, Kris.
Yeah. Richard Smith's probably not going to be happy that we're using it. But it is. It's been one that's heavily sort of hit home around what our role is of coaches, and I think that's been one of the. I don't want to touch too much on sort of next week's 2 weeks time sort of summary, but I think that's been the key thing of everything that we've covered in this sort of podcast is you need to be able to evolve. You need to put the people at the center of everything, and you need to be confident in knowing why you're doing it, and have belief that is the direction that you want to go in, and stick with that. And I think Ben was a great way to finish what has been a really good season so far.
100%. What episode, what a season. And bring on the reflections.
Yeah, so in 2 weeks' time we'll be back doing our end of season reflections, where we'll sum up each guest, each theme, each element of coaching skills that we've covered. Harrison's had this very bright idea after our chat with Jay Carter around let's take ourselves out of our comfort zone. So the reflection show we're going to aim to do live. It's going to be live streamed on YouTube, and then we'll upload the audio onto all the podcast platforms afterwards. So look out on our social media platforms for details of when and how you'll be able to watch that. Hopefully it's more than nobody watching. That's the biggest fear.
Well, our mums will be watching. Yeah,
unbelievable. Episode, yeah. I asked that. I was in Crete, but that for me, I think it's going to be interesting. It's going to be exciting. It's pushing us out of our comfort zone. Harrison's had to learn some new skills about how we actually do a live stream, but also hopefully there'll be less swearing, there'll be less mess ups by me, and you'll be able to see what the standard clear cut is. So that'll go out in 2 weeks' time. Charlie's got our social media details at the end with all the information, so you can look out for that, and we will see you next time.
Cheers for listening. Don't forget to join in the discussion at Big Breakdown HQ on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.